So the Vietnam War from 54 to 75. This is rough dates. It's hard to give exact dates of beginning and end because it starts before us and it actually continues after us for a little bit. But we'll use these dates because it works within the spectrum of this class. I typically show my kids this movie trailer. It's actually the only Vietnam War movie I can think of that's not inappropriate for a classroom setting. And it just really does, it does show napalm, it does show the type of fighting, it does show the use of the helicopters as you see in this picture. Anytime students see that, they should automatically think the Vietnam War. This was the cavalry, as they even mentioned that in that movie. But the Vietnam War, so how do we actually get this started? Well, keep in mind, this is during the Cold War. And the Cold War all has to do with one thing, communism. And all of this is all underneath our containment policy, which is preventing the spread of communism. So pause this if you want to try answer this question, and then we're going to move on. Three, two, one. Pause it. Answering it in 3, 2, 1. All right, so why does Vietnam get dragged into this containment policy, stopping the spread of communism? Well, it actually starts with Japan's defeat. And just like Korea was under Japanese control, so was Vietnam at one point during World War II. Once Japan loses the war, they lose all this territory. And in this case, Vietnam had been taken from the French as a French colony. This is called Indo-French China, or Indochina, if you will. And it actually included this whole area, not just a slim area. And French had control of this before World War II. And then the Japanese took over. And then afterwards, the question like, what do we do with it? Guys like Ho Chi Minh, leaders in North Vietnam that fought against the Japanese consistently, asked for independence. He quoted our Declaration of Independence. He talked about admiration for our founding fathers. He begged the United Nations to give him independence. But U.S.-led efforts in 54, we've got Eisenhower as president. He said no. He did not think that Vietnam could stand up against any other influence of communism like their neighbors, China. They were afraid that China would spread communism and take over Vietnam. And so Eisenhower, instead of giving the United Nations, led by the U.S., instead of giving Ho Chi Minh his independence, will return the area to the French to colonize. But that didn't last long. By 54, Ho Chi Minh had led a rebellion and beat the crap out of the French, and pretty much they were done. The French said, all right, 54, we're done. So the United Nations, the world gets together at the Geneva Conference, what to do with Vietnam, and ultimately they decide this. They're going to split Vietnam up with North and South. It might sound familiar. But they're going to have elections within a couple of years. 1956, they're scheduled to have elections. Both sides will vote to become either communist, like these guys up here, or democracy, like these guys down here. Okay, Ho Chi Minh is going to be in charge of North Vietnam and communism. The South is going to be supported by the United States. But the United States knew what was essentially going to happen in a couple of years. When that election happened in 56, the U.S. knew the people loved Ho Chi Minh. He was like their George Washington. The U.S. government was scared that the people of Vietnam would choose communism in a straight-up election. And so the U.S. made sure that 1956 election never happened. They made sure that was not going to happen in fear that people would choose communism. All right, so you want to pause it and try to answer this one real quick. Three, two, one. We're going to build up and help South Vietnam. Now, communism was not supposed to spread out, right? That was containment policy. Containment policy is the umbrella, right? At the very top, we have containment policy. Part of containment policy, we have stuff like the Truman Doctrine, right? We have the Marshall Plan. Part of that containment policy, stop and spread communism, was a domino theory. And this was the theory that if one country fell to communism, then the next one, the next country next to it would fall as well. So just like dominoes are stacked here and fall, if Vietnam fell to communism, then the next country is Laos. It would eventually become communist. Then Cambodia, then Thailand, then Burma, and then you have a huge population of India and Bangladesh and so on. All it takes is just one country to fall to communism, and you have a whole series of failures to communism. You can see this hat right here says Viet Cong. That's a nickname for North Koreans, the communist North Koreans, in case you ever see that anywhere, it'll help you. But you know the domino theory, that's why we're there. That's why JFK believed that. Later on, we have different ideas about that, but I'll get to that later, JFK. But JFK didn't send troops to fight, he sent military advisors. The metaphor we always have here when we talk about Vietnam War is that JFK put our toes in the water. If the Vietnam War was a lake, we didn't jump in right away and go to war. No, we didn't jump full on in, dive in. No, we put one foot in first. And that first foot would be JFK with military advisors. Because once you get military advisors there, and something happens to them, now you're invested more than just as an advisor. Now it's, I guess you could say it's personal, right? Okay, so pause this if you want to give this a try. I'm going to answer it in 3, 2, 1. Communism, that's what it's all about. All right, you can go ahead and pause this. I'm going to answer it. 3, 2, 1. All right, so, but remember, Kennedy dies. He gets shot in the head, boom, he's done. 63, we got a new guy, Johnson, in charge. Johnson wins this re-election, he becomes president. But one day he appears on TV and he tells American people, he says, hey, we got a problem here. Off the Gulf, out in the ocean, a U.S. ship was attacked by the North Vietnam. They had a ship out here, my pre-ship, and they attacked our ship. We were just minding our own business, and here they attacked us. Right? But nonetheless, they attacked us. But hey, Johnson makes an argument. He goes, I can't ask for Congress to meet, ask for a declaration of war. That takes too long. The world is different now. The president needs to be able to respond when we're attacked immediately without waiting for Congress to fly to D.C., to meet up together, to hold a vote, to debate and hold a vote. He goes, no, we need immediate choices. And so Congress decides they're going to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. This is an important one. This is one that students often mess up on when they take the test. It said that the President of the United States can use whatever steps he thinks is necessary to repel an attack on U.S. forces. So if they attacked us here, now that gives us every right to send troops and do whatever we want. We got to respond, okay, without a declaration of war. Literally think about that. The whole point of asking Congress for a declaration of war is a separation of powers. We didn't want a tyrant in charge. We didn't want another king. We had that written in the Constitution. You have to ask for a declaration of war from Congress for us to actually go to war. But the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was a temporary fix, supposed to be a temporary fix, where now you can send troops without having to ask Congress. And times were changing at the time. It wasn't like it was in 1776, 1781 when they wrote this Constitution, right? So the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, again, said the United States can send in troops, react however they seem fit. The president can just do it without asking Congress for a declaration of war. Okay, so if you take a look at this question, pause it and try to answer it. Okay, I'm going to answer it in 3, 2, 1. Okay. As time went on, LBJ would take advantage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, and he's going to take this war to a whole nother level. If you just look at this map, you'll see by 68. Remember, this Gulf of Tonkin happens in 64, and very quickly, by 68, we've got 500,000 Americans in Vietnam. Things dramatically take off pretty fast. So this is the height. And if you're wondering why He really had a bad Secretary of Defense. Like, historically speaking, people look at this guy, and this guy was talking about how we can do this, we're going to win. And then all of a sudden, in 68, this guy telling LBJ, there's no chance at all. We're not going to win. There's nothing we can do in the Vietnam War. And LBJ just refused to accept that, sent more troops. But that's a whole other story. We do know this. After the Gulf of Tonkin, now LBJ says, well, I guess I can do whatever I want. And he sends in 500,000 troops. He'll start bombing. We create new weapons like napalm, which is kind of like jelly, but on fire, as you can see in this picture here. And then also Agent Orange, which they would spray over the jungles of Vietnam to kill vegetation so we can see the enemy because the enemy's hiding out there. This was a different war, essentially. The Vietnam War changed things dramatically. Now, the government, Johnson, had been telling people that the war is almost over. Stick it out, Americans. We're almost there. That all changed after the TET offense. TET is the Vietnamese New Year's. And typically this day is ceasefire by the North and the South. Nobody fights on TET. It's a holiday, right? But secretly, the North Vietnamese have been building this road. It's called the Ho Chi Minh Trail now. Outside of Vietnam, in Laos. And then they made this road go all the way through Cambodia and right into the border of South Vietnam. Secretly, the North had built this, the North Communists. And then, once the TET offense happens, these guys will go full force and attack from these trails multiple points. Like just attack multiple points all throughout the South simultaneously. All on TET, on a holiday where there's supposed to be no fighting at all. They have a massive game plan strategy and just attack the South. Catching them by surprise. The South responds, they secure it. It's not the end of the war, but here's the catch. All the way up to this point, Johnson was swearing. All the way up to 68, he was telling American people, it's almost over, stick it out. The last of them are around. We've almost got the North beat. The Viet Cong are running. It's almost over. And then you wake up and the news starts reporting this TET offense where they massacred and killed so many people and almost had a few victories in these battles. You know, if you hear about the TET offense, you know for a fact that the government was lying this whole time. In fact, North Vietnam is nowhere near about to surrender. They just launched a massive attack on you. They're not at their weakest point at all. That's a clear lie. They're stronger than ever before. So TET offense is known as a turning point. It showed the public that the government lied. The media, it will report this, and the media during the Vietnam War changes everything. Now the media is reporting this, saying, hey, you guys told Johnson's administration is telling us this, blah, 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 but this is what happened. And public began to distrust the government. After TET offense, I don't think the government could have said anything that the public would have believed because they've been lying so much. And that's called credibility. The federal government will lose credibility with the American people. They no longer believe what the government says. I know we don't do it at all now, period. But at this point in time, you could trust the government's not lying to you about everything to do with war. In this case, they were. So TET offense, not really a physically turning point. There's no land take, anything like that. But the media is going to emphasize on this and remind everybody how the administration lied to us. So it is a turning point as far as back home. People see the war differently because you've got a lot of anti-war and pro-war people back home. Okay, so go ahead, pause this, and then try to answer the question. The answer comes in 3, 2, 1. More troops were sent. All right, so the media, after TET offense, starts paying attention to the war and start reporting more, and public opinion just gets worse. America goes as the hero in this fight to stopping communism and helping democracy to the villain. You can tell from like this photo right here. This is one of our guys, our allies, shooting what appears to be a man in a civilian clothing. Now, there's a different story behind that, but that picture doesn't tell you that. That's what that picture tells us. You see napalm in the background, bombing these kids and burning their clothes off. Napalm in the background here. These kids being hurt, dying, children dying. Well, what if I told you Americans are the only one using napalm? So you know who's doing that bombing. And the media is reporting on this. America went, for the first time ever, we're the enemy. we're the aggressor nation. Vietnam War was the first war where it's like, no, we're the bad guys now. We're trying to stop the spread of communism, so we think we're doing it good, but the media showed a different story. And journalists reported on all these atrocities. You can even look up, it's called My Lao Massacre, MY space LAI Massacre. And that should tell you a lot, because it's horrific what American soldiers did over there. They were essentially just thrown into the jungle and turned loose. And the stuff that they did is pretty horrible. America's a bad guy in this war. The world looks at us as, I cannot believe Americans are doing that. They're doing this. It creates a credibility gap between what the government says and the truth. There's a gap. And that's a credibility gap. The government does not have credibility whatsoever with the American people about what's going on. The media is showing the truth. So, question about the media here. All righty? 3, 2, 1. Now, there were anti-war people. There were anti-war movement. Mainly you see hippies. You can see them right here walking all the way up and putting flowers into the rifles. That was a pretty big deal back then because it's after Kent State shootings in another chapter if you look that up. There are massive protests from burning draft cards. These guys say burn draft cards, not children. What's America doing? Again, the guys burning draft cards. I've always pointed out, because you guys know protests that they march. You know where they held rallies and demonstrations and stuff like that, and boycotts and strikes and stuff like that. But if you see anything about burning a draft card, you're saying you're anti-war, the anti-Vietnam War specifically. People getting drafted left and right at the age of 18, right? And this was a pretty big deal. And people were told, just burn them. Burn your draft card and don't report. And people did it in a large number. Now, hawks were people that supported the war. Doves were people that was against it, if you ever see that reference. I've never seen that reference on STAAR, but it could be a possible reference. Okay, so try to answer this question. Pause it and select the 2 correct answers. 3, 2, 1. Obviously, burning draft cards is definitely an anti-war tactic. If you look at the other stuff, it doesn't make sense, right? Lunch counter sit-ins, not at the lunch counter. Voter registration drives, no, this isn't about voter registration. Public transport boycotts, they're trying to make you think of the bus boycott, the Montgomery bus boycott with Rosa Parks. They're just trying to distract you. That's a distractor. Lunch counter sit-ins, you couldn't have sit-ins as a protest, but lunch counter sit-ins were for segregation purposes. They're just trying to bait you. Clearly, it's not voter registration, so the answers are burn draft cards and public demonstrations. If you take a look at this picture right here from Johnson, this is actually like a myth. He wasn't actually upset about the Vietnam War. He didn't seem too torn up about it. But Vietnam War plagued him. His Great Society programs, they fail at their purpose because of the Vietnam War. So much money for over 10 years went to Vietnam War. So much money. So essentially, once he realized it's a folly, he can't win, Johnson says he won't run for re-election. At that point in time, he could have ran another term, but he didn't. He's not going to run for re-election, and said Richard Nixon will win. Part of the reason why Richard Nixon wins is, number one, the Democrats are divided over Vietnam War. Should we do it? Should we back it up? Should we back it up? Should we not? Second, RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, he was a front runner. He would have won the nomination, and I bet he would have won presidency had he done so. And I think we would pull out Vietnam early, but nonetheless, he is shot. RFK is actually shot in a hotel kitchen after giving a speech. So Democrats can't win because they don't have him. The Democrats divided over the war, so they don't know how to vote or what to just do. And the biggest thing that you actually have to know for STAAR is the violence at the Democrat National Convention. People show up at the convention where they nominate their nominees for president, or they pick their nominee for president. And the Democrat National Convention was held in Chicago that year, and there were massive protests because of the Vietnam War. All these people here are there because of the Vietnam War, and they're protesting the Democrats what they did, how they did it, and how wrong it is. And you can think, well, that's bad, but you can still win an election. Maybe, but what people turn on TV, they saw the violence that the mayor of Chicago had put on these people and the response of violence. And people looked at the Democrat world and was like, I do not want a world like that. So those 3 reasons are really why Democrats lose to Nixon and so handily. If you look at Nixon's electoral map down there, he's pretty hands down wins. He does make a promise: peace with honor. He's going to leave Vietnam War, but we're going to have it. We're going to keep it honor in all this. We don't have to conquer them to have that honor, but we will leave with honor. And that's essentially how Nixon will become president, as second attempt to do so. Now, Nixon's policy, he believes in Vietnamization, which is a made-up word, and it sounds like it as well. But essentially, Nixon is going to withdraw troops slowly, but only after he trains south. He's going to take his troops, trains the South Vietnamese troops to attack. That's part of Vietnamization, slowly pull troops out, let them take care of themselves, but also massively bomb neighbors. Cambodia will be bombed a lot. The Ho Chi Minh Trail went through there. And so for Nixon, this is just a war problem. Now, for us, you can't go bomb another country. Like, you need a declaration of war. But Nixon would justify it by saying, hey, I have the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. That says we can send troops where we think is necessary, and that's what I'm doing. So we really took that to the extreme, essentially. Nixon would bomb Cambodia, invade it. He actually sent troops in, try to take over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Absolutely illegal to do this. You can't just bomb random countries whenever you want. International community and the United States agrees on that. And then Nixon will also do a sudden turnabout and meet with China and Russia. And his goal is to start negotiations with them so that North Vietnam will end the war. He goes, if I can make friends with China, China will put pressure on Vietnam to stop. And so that's Nixon's plan. The guy who's so anti-communist that he was crazy is now going to go to China and meet with the premier to get to know him better and make better relations. This is easing of strained relations through communication, and that is called détente. Nixon is the détente man. He goes to Vietnam, he goes to China, and then eventually Russia, talks to those different groups of people. He wants to end this war, and essentially help lead to the end of the Cold War too. So détente is one that students are often forget about when they're taking their test. Now, Nixon, as the war goes on, Nixon is, he argues that people still support him, that only a few people don't. He would call them his silent majority. They're just not loud and speaking like these hippies, but they're still there. So he believes he has support. Until 1971, the Pentagon Papers were leaked. These papers were written at the Pentagon, and it was done by the Secretary of Defense to summarize the war effort and the war history. Essentially, the Pentagon Papers went through and showed the truth about the Vietnam since 1945. From Truman, who thought this was dumb, we should mess with it, to Eisenhower, who thought it wasn't worth it, but he refused to give up an inch of communism. JFK was openly like, this is dumb what we're doing here. We can't risk war in Vietnam. Who cares? And then Johnson's lies as well, and even Nixon. Nixon Vietnamization, now Americans find out this dude's bombing Cambodia. Who are we at war with? Everybody? He didn't have to ask for declaration of war, so he did so. So now people are upset. The Pentagon Papers showed us the truth, and people really, really hated the government. The Pentagon Papers were so bad, when the New York Times started publishing it, they would publish a little bit at a time. A guy snuck them out. He took pictures of these papers and snuck them out of the Pentagon that worked there because he was sick of the way the Vietnam War was going. He wanted to show people the truth. And so he would do that, and he would give it to New York Times, and they would publish a little bit every day. It took about 3 days, I think, before Nixon's administration stepped in and stopped allowing the printing of the paper. Now, that's a violation of freedom of press. Now, Nixon's argument was like, hey, we have national security, and you're threatening national security in this manner. So this is completely justifiable. And it goes up to the Supreme Court. And the New York Times versus the United States, the U.S. Supreme Court rules that freedom of press had been violated. You cannot always claim national defense and not be able to prove it. You have to prove that. And they couldn't. The Republicans couldn't prove that by giving these plans, everybody would know what's going on because it wasn't. But nonetheless, the Pentagon Papers does get released. Nixon tried to stop it, blame national security. He gets, Supreme Court shuts that down. They're like, no, freedom of speech, freedom of press has to be pushed. That's the First Amendment, right? That has to be allowed. So there's a question. I pause, try to answer it. I'm answering in 3, 2, 1. Now, they said freedom of press. They could have said the First Amendment, right? Now, Nixon's plans of vietnamization works. It's a very slow process, but essentially he's slowly pulling out troops, expecting the South to take over. But as we essentially just pull out our troops, we'll have Henry Kissinger will go to Vietnam. He'll negotiate. We agree to pull out if they give us the last of the POWs they've been keeping for years. I mean, some of these guys they had for years, half a decade or a decade, locked up in the ground somewhere. John McCain is one of them when I think of these Vietnam War POWs. But nonetheless, essentially we're going to leave. And once we leave South Vietnam, it's not but maybe 2 years later, South Vietnam falls to North Vietnam. North Vietnam continues on, and they have no problem. Once we're gone, that's it. The South can't take care of itself. So one of the most iconic pictures is this one right here. This is in Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. Everybody's kind of getting a helicopter to leave. These are all the people that are pro-American, that are American allies, that works for the American government. They know as the North is marching to the South and entering Saigon, they don't have much time left. What would you do if the other half of the country is marching in and they're willing to kill you for helping the Americans? Everybody's trying to get off, and they fail to do so. If you actually look locally, city of Houston, one of our largest population is Vietnamese because of this. Because once the fall of Saigon happens and the capital falls in the South, people will leave in huge numbers. Some people jump on boats and just set sail to try to make it to Indonesia. And a lot of people do make it to the United States. And one of the biggest, I think the second or largest Vietnamese concentration in the United States is actually here in Houston, in Texas, in what we call Chinatown. A lot of them are Vietnamese, not even Chinese, as a matter of fact. But those are some boat people. But essentially, when you see this picture in Saigon, you have to think of the fall of Saigon is the end of the war. Even though we're not there, still we have the war's legacy on us. 58,000 Americans have died. For 1 million are killed. All the expensive war stuff kill the Great Society programs. Nobody trusts the government or believes in the government. And then, worst of all, you've got the executive branch, the President of the United States, using power he shouldn't have. And after Johnson did it and Nixon did it, Congress gets together and says, we got to fix this. Gulf of Tonkin resolution was not the right thing to do. It was bad. And so they're going to pass the War Powers Resolution. Because of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution and the president had unlimited powers, Congress was settled with the War Powers Resolution. And that just put a limit on the president's ability to send troops. Like, the president can still send troops right away, but he has to notify Congress within 48 hours. And then Congress will be able to vote and has to vote within 60 days to bring the troops home or leave them there. So it did give the president power to react, but it didn't give him ultimate freedom to send troops wherever he wanted. He would have to report to Congress about this. So we had the Gulf of Tonkin resolution and had a War Powers Resolution. One gives unlimited freedom to the president to do anything. Then later on, Congress fixes it with the War Powers Resolution. Those are kind of two things students struggle with the most when it comes down to it. All right, so try to answer this. I'm going to answer it positive if you need to. I'm going to go in 3, 2, 1. President versus Congress. Who has the authority to declare war? That's what this is all about. Okay, pause it and try to answer this. I'm going to do it in 3, 2, 1. All right, we also have our last Medal of Honor winner you have to know for the STAAR test. First, we had Alvin York, and then we had Vernon Baker with World War II. Remember, he was the only African-American living one. And then now we have Rory Benavidez. Rory Benavidez does some amazing, you have to watch this video or just look up the entire story of him. But essentially, this guy goes behind enemy lines. This is after a rough life. Like, he had been blown up once already and came back to Vietnam. He goes behind enemy lines to rescue some men. He gets shot so many times, so much shrapnel, they think he's dead. Watch this video if you get a chance to do it. Just, if you don't want to click the link, just Google the Green Beret who goes on one-man rampage. It's a cartoon, so even my kids like it. But this is one of the ultimate stories of just America that you could possibly think of that really should be a movie. Okay, and the questions you get about this Medal of Honor winner are pretty simple. Here's a question. Pause it if you need to. And then I'm answering 3, 2, 1. There you go. We end this with the Vietnam War and Roy Benavidez. Now, the rest of this stuff, if you want to look at my PowerPoints, you can do this. None of us is really talking about STAAR test, so we're not going to go over it. But we do have counterculture, rock and roll takes off. I talked about that with the hippies and other stuff as well, and art too. But for most part, for our STAAR